Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by and welcome to the Project Orchids Update 3, and this is part 2, which is the chosen few dendrobiums. I put all the dendrobiums together so that they stay together. So what better way to start than by looking at some dendrobiums? And I know somebody's going to ask, this is as far as I know an unnamed primary cross. It's a cross between infundibulum and loddigesii, and beautiful blooms, and they last 2.5 to 3 months. Bonus. So let's have a look at the chosen few dendrobiums and see what progress we've had. Okay, first up then is Dendrobium alexandrae, a Latoria type. Very attractive blooms, very long lasting. As a plant, this one survived the demise of virtually all the other Latorias quite well. It managed to keep most of its leaves, and what I was looking for at this time of year was progress from that point. So I was looking for new growths. Even though it hung on to its leaves, it had remained stationary for a while at this point. No new growths, although it had pushed out a few roots. So it was stabilised, I would say, but still really in a state of stalled, because it should have had new growths at this time of year. So let's see what happened with this one. Okay, so on the surface of things, nothing's changed. And as one of my Latoria types, in a way that's a good thing. As I said, most of my others have deteriorated and are in a state of recovery, and they are, but it's slow progress. What this one didn't do was go down with all the others. This one hung in there. Don't know why, just possibly more resilient to the heat, whatever, but it didn't dump all its leaves. But what it hasn't done is started to grow. So all it's done is effectively stall, to all intents and purposes. But there's often a but, isn't there? If we come over here, we've got a flower spike starting. We also have one starting there, just in their infancy at the moment, and in both cases those canes have already bloomed from the apex, from between the top two leaves, and they're doing it again. Now sometimes they'll push a spike out lower down, sort of below that pair of leaves, but in this case it looks like it's going to bloom on both of those canes. If it does, that will be the first Latoria blooms we've had for some time, due to the demise of heat waves, lack of humidity and factors, too cold in the winter, too wet in the winter. All those things have now been eradicated, but this is the only one that didn't go down, and I'm well pleased, and it looks like it's going to bloom. So I would say I've got progress on this one, but not the progress I was really hoping for. What I was hoping for was new canes, put more life into the plant. But the fact that it's held its leaves is good, and it's strong enough to bloom. I'm not worried about those spikes coming out. I mean, the canes it's got, they're good, they're firm, they're not desiccated in any way. It has got a root system underneath there, so I'll be happy to let this one bloom. It'll be a little while, but the beauty is they will last for ages. This is what we like about the Latorias. So that's that one. Now the Dendrobium loddigesii, last time we looked, was covered in kikis. It had started some new growths. If you look in the dead centre of the shot, there's a nice new cane coming up there, and some of the kikis looked like they were close enough to the mount to actually take root and become new plants, sort of effectively in their own right. They become independent of the cane that's supporting them. So growth was in progress, but I wouldn't say it had a lot of new growths. Certainly nowhere near as many new canes from the base of the plant, the centre of the plant, as it did the year before. But it does have a natural growth habit of producing keikis right near the ends of the canes, that when it arches over and touches things, they take root and they produce new plantlets, allowing the plant to make quite a large mat in its natural format. So that's where we were then. All I was hoping for really was for the few new canes I'd got to actually push on, and at least some of those keikis to take root and actually become plants in their own right. So let's see. Well, last time we looked at the loddigesii, we had a lot of keikis and some new growths, and some of those new growths were from the base of the plant, like this one. So that's quite a nice cane. A few from down here, and then some of the keikis were close enough in to root onto the mount, so they were left. Oh, hang on, the fan's just come on. Knock them off. Don't need those at the moment. We've got much heat in here at all today. It's a dull day, which is quite good for filming really, because you get an even light. Anyway, so that's the state of play there. But what has happened in between is most of the keikis were taken off and started on their own mount. None of those have died, and some of them are showing signs of progression. All the roots look healthy. There's not a lot of activity on those keikis yet. I suspect they will come into more serious growth mode when we get into spring next year. But in theory, given the number of plants on there, that could end up being a lot better than the original mother plant. So I'm not getting rid of either of them at the moment. I did plant those keikis up with a plan to send them on to somebody else, but quite honestly, it's a good piece of bark. There's a high number of plants on there, which means there's a base to each one of those keikis for potential new growth. So I'm highly likely to keep that, because it's just a dendrobium I like a lot. I like its growth pattern. I like its blooms. Yeah, so we have progress here. Some of the keikis have grown on nicely. Some of the canes have grown on, but there aren't many. And most of the older canes on here have already bloomed and may not do so again. So I might not get that good a blooming come springtime, but we will see. We'll get some, I'm sure, but we might not get as many as last time round. And then this one is to grow on as and when it chooses to do so. Main growth will be next year, probably. So the idea of planting them at the time of year they were done is that they would establish this year, survive the winter, and grow next year. And if we can get one new growth on each one of those plants, that's going to be a huge plant by the end of next year. Well, that's the theory anyway. So that's that one. The next one, Mr. Hairy, Dendrobium senile. It's actually a black hair type, only it has white hairs. Very attractive blooms, fragrant, waxy, reasonably long-lasting. I won't say long-lasting, but not bad. This is a plant that has a tendency to just go down for no apparent reason. It's I've spoken to lots of others that have tried it, and even though they had what seemed like a good plant, they just keel over. So main goal with this one is keeping the flipping thing alive. And at this time we were looking at it, it had quite a few new growths come in and had started a reasonable root system under the new growth, so it was progressing. It's not a fast grower by any means, but it was growing. And yeah, it was just a matter of keeping this one going. It doesn't like to get too hot, doesn't like extreme bright light in the summertime, although it does like a hell of an increase in light in the winter time. But it's not a true rester, not really, not in the true sense. Nonetheless, it was growing and I was pleased with the progress. Right, two things with Mr. Hairy. Its new growths have progressed okay. One cane in particular has really pushed on nicely. So what we've now got is some quite large canes, perfectly capable of blooming. Not now, but come next year. And lots of other canes that are still growing. And I've still got new growths pushing out, just starting. So this is growing well. I'm not planning on a mass blooming or anything next year. I will take blooms on this one as and when they occur. I don't intend putting in a huge effort to get it to bloom. These are not that easy to keep alive, so that's primary goal. Number one is to get this out the other end of the winter without it dying back, which is quite easy to do. In theory it's a winter rester, but it isn't a proper rester. It's a drier and cooler in winter. I don't think this needs the full rest. 2 years on the trot now. Okay, this year I got one bloom. Last year I had more than that. But keeping it alive through the winter is the primary goal. And also, if I've got growths that are growing, it's maintaining that growth through a period where it wouldn't normally be growing. So those are the priorities at the moment. There's several plants on here. I think there's 4. Now some are larger and stronger than others. I want them all to get their strength. We'll worry about blooms later on this one. So say this one has a nasty habit of seeming to be doing quite well and then just keeling over. Obviously I don't want that to happen. So I need to look after this one. Let's get it through the winter, that primary goal, get it through the winter, stop any dieback that may occur by keeping it too dry, and get it out the other end, and then we'll see what happens. But I highly suspect we should get some blooms on a couple of the canes, maybe not all of them. This is the cane that bloomed. It had a single bloom which also pushed out a root from the base of the bloom spike. There's quite a few dendrobiums do that. It's a little bit worrying, but that's what they do. So we just try and keep this one going. It's doing okay. I'm quite pleased. This Dendrobium tetragonum seems to be a slow grower when it shouldn't be. Last time we looked at it, sort of top right in the picture was a new growth, and slightly to the right of that, sort of covering up the wire, was a growth that hadn't grown properly. It only produced one leaf that didn't open properly. There was another little new growth right out to the right hand side, but immature. It didn't mature properly. So what I was hoping for with this was growth. New canes. Doesn't seem to grow quickly, this one, for me, but it seemed a healthy plant. It had done a good root system, so I was sort of happy with its progress at that particular point. But it had bloomed. It bloomed once, and it turned out to not be what I was expecting. It turned out to be some sort of alba or semi-alba form, and in disgust I forgot to take a picture, so I do apologise. We've got no picture of the bloom for this one, mainly because it wasn't what I wanted. It's not what was, it was actually given to me. It's not like I bought it, I don't think. I can't remember. Anyway, so that's where we were with that one at that particular point in time. Now this little one hasn't progressed much at all, and it has issues, again of unknown origin. But if you think back to the problem I had with newer leaves on the Hibiki, well, this one's got the same problem. Yeah, this is the latest growth up here, and these are the latest 2 leaves, and they're heavily spotted with purple. Now that could be a light issue. It's even got a sheath. I don't think that's going to bloom though. But this is not growing as well as it should be. Given that it has a good root system, there's nothing wrong with that root system for the size of the plant. It should be growing better than it is. So I'll have to have another little look up. You know, I mean, if this is a cooler grower, then it's not going to do well in here in the summer. You know, if it's one that tolerates heat okay, then that's not the problem. You know, you go through a process of elimination. But this, you know, there's a couple of leaves here not happy. Now that's an old cane. You know, they do become leafless eventually, but it shouldn't be dumping leaves left, right and centre. This was a new growth that didn't develop. You know, they should each have 2 leaves at the top. This one didn't even open one of them properly. So the plant has issues, as yet unknown. But it's still alive, and we'll see what we can do. But it hasn't pushed out a new growth now for some time. Literally, some time. So I'll have to look into that one. At the moment, I'd say that was stalled, stationary, not growing, not exactly dying, but not looking like it should. So I need, you know, as I said, when a plant's got issues, you have to start looking into things. And I doubt if it's a feeding issue. I mean, it's the same as everything else, doesn't it? So it's not that. Maybe it has had too much light at one point, but certainly isn't getting too much light now where it's positioned. So something to look into, but not doing as well as it should be. So it's not going backwards as such. It certainly isn't going forwards either. So we'll look into that one and see what that looks like next time we look at it, if it's still with us. The Dendrobium hibiki, last time we looked, there were nubbins just thinking about possibly blooming in the not too distant future. I had a serious problem with that top left hand cane, which was its latest strong growth. The leaves were just deteriorating, starting with the latest leaves moving back down the cane, and it looked serious. Purple spotting that turned into pitting and deteriorated the leaves quite badly. So I was a trifle worried about the state of the plant, but nonetheless it still looked like it was going to bloom. It had all the hallmarks of possibly having spider mites, but it had a pesticide, so if they were there, in theory they're gone, and that could be some sort of infection following their little bitey holes in the leaves, which is what often happens after spider mite and some other bugs attacks, is you get an infection in the damaged areas. But at the point it was unknown. So basically I sort of decided that probably the best thing to do with that cane was major surgery. get rid of the danger area and stop it spreading. The other new growths were sort of pushing on, so we did have other new growths beside that one. That was just the one that had progressed the fastest and was the largest and strongest at the time. So let's see what happened with this one, given a bit more of the time. Well, the obvious change on this one is we've now got blooms, which is good. Now, like that tetragonum that that we've just looked at, this is the other one I was on about that has issues still as yet undefined. But from the photo of what this looked like last time, this was the growth that had all the issues on it, and basically the end of the cane was just sliced off to remove all of the leaves with problems, basically. Now, the latest new growths sort of seem to be okay, sort of. They're looking better. There's actually a kiki coming off that cane I chopped. So we don't have the issues currently on the newer growths, but the issue has been there. I mean, it shows its worst on some of the oldest leaves on the back. Yeah. It has all the hallmarks of some sort of bacterial or fungal infection, possibly following bugs. And the most likely bugs to have damaged the back of a leaf like that are spider mites, which I don't believe I've had. But you can get a little outbreak of spider mites on a single plant, and because they're happy, they don't move. So they'll just have that one plant. That's unusual. If you've got them, they do tend to spread. They do like to walk about and see if there's anything tastier down the road, sort of thing. But the plant itself has had fungicide treatment. Now, if it's bacterial, fungicide is probably not going to touch it. You need some sort of disinfectant-y type thing, like possibly something like Physan 20 or something, which I've got, but I've never actually used on plants. The only thing I've ever used it for is cleaning the algae off my floor. And I disinfected it, cleaned the whole place a while back, where I literally took all the shelves out, cleaned down the glass, the woodwork, cleaned all the shelves off and put it all back in. And I ain't doing it again. I had serious problems when that happened. I was ill in the middle of doing it while I had all the plants in the lounge all over the floor, and the boiler broke down and I lost my heating. So, it got dodgy, let's put it that way. Anyway, we got blooms on this. New growth seemed to be doing okay. It's had a fungicide treatment, and it's also had the systemic pesticide treatment in case I've got that other type of spider mite that you literally can't see. Red spider mites, you can see them. They're not that tiny, and also they're quite easy to detect. With your old wet thumb, rub the leaf, you get a rusty stain from where you've squashed them, basically. But the other types, that doesn't work. They're a yellowy colour, yellowy creamy colour, far, far, far smaller, difficult to spot. You won't see them with the naked eye, basically. You see where they've been from the damage they leave behind. But so, possibilities, but no definitive diagnosis yet. But it's blooming well, and I have new growths coming out in many places. So I'd say it was doing okay. It's just got that little worry in the background that something has been wrong with it, and maybe it's getting over it. Difficult to tell. Time will tell, of course. Right, this is one of my true winter resters. Had not long been out of bloom when we looked at it, and the new growths had just started at the top of the photo there, in their infancy, I would say, just an inch or two long. But at least I had two of them. Previous year I only had one new growth, which had blooms on, bloomed over well over 2/3 of the length of the cane and put on quite a little show for a relatively short time. They don't last too long, 3 weeks-ish. But nonetheless, at this stage, apart from one leaf that just seems determined to hang on that cane, it was leafless prior to the new growths. It is a true deciduous dendrobium, true winter rester, and as such for me is quite easy to look after because it's totally predictable. I know exactly what to do with it and what it's going to do for me. So I find these much easier than those that are resters but keep their leaves. They fool you. False sense of security. Anyway, at this particular time I was pleased to have got a couple of new growths, and I was hoping to see those push on. Somewhere near full size would be good, but it's still a young plant. Okay, so obvious changes on this one are it's grown a bit. The two emerging new canes have developed nearly up to their full length now, so it's grown well. This is just goes back to my old expression: feed and water well when in active growth, and you do need to get canes to grow to their full ability, their full length. It's also pushed out a hell of a good root system this year. Bearing that in mind, it started as a kiki, so it's come on well. It's even started another new growth relatively recently. Now obviously that is not going to develop, that is not going to reach its full potential, so it's only got a few weeks left. But the two new canes are still in growth, both of them. So they haven't finished growing yet, so they will get longer. It always looks a little bit on these type of deciduous cane dendrobiums, especially when they're hanging, that they're actually getting worse because the leaves are getting smaller and smaller and smaller as they go down. They do carry on growing for a while, yeah, but we haven't yet reached our terminal leaf on either of these two yet. So while they are still growing at the tip, the leaves behind them also start getting bigger. Now the ones towards the tip of the cane are never going to reach the full size of the earlier ones that have had a whole growing season to push on, because before they can get to that size, it'll go into its winter rest. It'll cease growing from the tip, and at that point it'll start thinking about dumping its leaves, which is quite dramatic on aphyllum, because you see some yellow tinges, and then, next time you come round to thinking about watering it, you've got a pile of leaves on the floor. Can be quite worrying, because sometimes they really will dramatically dump their leaves. But at the moment, still in growth mode. It's pushed on two nice new canes. I doubt if there would be blooms on the older canes because this was last year's growth and it bloomed almost over the full length of the cane. So and once a node has bloomed, it isn't going to bloom again. It only does it once. But hopefully, with 2 canes this time, twice the number of blooms, twice the spectacle. I just wish they lasted longer. But it's grown well. I'm happy. Yeah, nice plant. Right, so last time we looked at the Prima Donna, having got a best hybrid in show, it wouldn't get it now, would it? I split it and I held on to the blooms as long as possible, then split it, repotted it at the wrong time of year. So although it was sort of correct, it had some new canes starting and some signs of new roots. It was a bit late in the year for something that has to grow canes this big in a single season, but nonetheless I had some new growths growing and some of the new roots had pushed on. So I'd class it as sort of recovering from quite a major setback and shock, and not setback as much as possibly I was expecting, because I did get the new growths. So the idea with this was to see how much growth I could get out of those canes in what was left of the season, following quite a major upset in the plant. So let's see how that one progressed as the season moved on. Okay, so this nobile type got disturbed at the wrong time, as I said, but nonetheless it's picking up. It's not going to do a mass blooming in the spring, that's for sure. But what I'm working on is the following year. So not next year, the year after. I know it seems like a long way off, but we have to plan ahead. This was once best hybrid in show. It was a specimen-sized plant. Well, that's what I'm working back towards. Yeah, it'll take time. But this year, the new growths have pushed on nicely. This one has finished growing. Terminal leaf, yeah, very obvious. Yeah, straight out the top. No accompanying leaf, no pairing, nothing. So terminal leaf. This cane's still growing. This cane's still growing. And it started another new little one round here. That's not going to get to its full size by any means. And this is not a full size cane, although it's finished growing. Yeah, it hasn't reached its full size. These two are probably not going to get to their full size either. The plant was just disturbed too much following a huge massive blooming which took all its strength. So it's had a double whammy setback, basically. Used all its strength and effort to get that blooming out. I held on to them as long as possible because of the show coming up and everything, and then effectively took my time before I got round to splitting it and repotting it. So it's my own fault, but there was no way that year I was going to sacrifice that blooming, because that may well be a one-off. It may never achieve that again. But what it is doing is growing nicely. It's pushed out a lot of new roots, got a pot full of roots. It'll fall over if I pick it up, but it's done roots, coming out the bottom of the pot as well. Now don't you fall over. Very, very top heavy, this one. It has to lean against something. It lives up in that corner, basically, where it just leans over there. But again, it's produced that root system, I believe, because it was put in a small pot. You know, a plant that size looks like it could do with a much bigger pot. But I've found from experience the roots don't grow as quickly or as well for a while. So you add to your setback. So if you cram them in a small pot, they seem to take off like rockets. So that's where we are with this one. We will get blooms next year. How many, I don't know. But I'm pleased with its progress given the circumstances. That's all I can really say about that. And hopefully next year, because it can stay in that pot or possibly be potted on next spring when some more new roots start growing, could just be put in a bigger pot, because the media won't be going, it won't be breaking down or anything. It's in bark. There's no moss in there to help it break down or to go off or anything. So it can stay in the pot as it is, but a larger pot may be beneficial next year. Yeah, so we'll see how we go with that one. So It's I won't say it's my favourite nobile anymore. It certainly was once. You know, I'm a sucker for yellows, but yeah, I've got others around now, gifts from people and things like that. So in the world of the nobiles, we'll have quite a bit more to see next year, because up until then we've just had the two, the Prima Donna, this one, and the Spring Dreamer pollen. So we've got others to look forward to. Right, that's that one. So there we go then, that was part 2 of update 3, the Dendrobiums, and parts 3 and 4 will follow on when I get round to filming them. This is the only one of the parts that is a single genus. All the others are mixed to some degree or another, but you know, I've got so many Dendrobiums, I thought it was worth separating those out and have a little part to themselves. So that was part 2 of update 3. Parts 3 and 4 will follow shortly. Hope you've enjoyed it. I think a lot of people quite like looking at a comparison over a period of time to see how plants have progressed, or in some cases not. You know, it's never all good news. I don't work that way. I think it's that's why these project plants were chosen, so that I can't swap and twist them around to my own benefit and only show good plants. If one of the project plants starts going down, it still gets included. It's still in there, and we'll have a chat about why I think it's happened and all that. So I think it's a good way to work with this set of orchids, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.